And again, for those of you not familiar with the Women's Health Tech Initiative at HitLab, it's one of the leading initiatives globally to help reduce the gender disparities in health tech and venture. And again, Deborah's a big part of that community, as is the director, Susan Solinsky from Ellipsis Health. Susan's been a part of HitLab community now for a long time and is just a tremendous leader in that front. And we'll hear from her later on today. But now we have just, I think the director of medical affairs, Prem, will be interviewing Shwen who's also a longtime member of the HitLab community and a good friend who's leading up digital health strategy for BMS now, and will help elucidate. Shwen goes to all events. Shwen knows everybody. So if there's one person that can really tell us what we learned from JPM and all the different meetings at JPM last week, it's Shwen. But I'll leave the video now and go ahead and hear this conversation. Looking forward to it. Thanks for joining us, Shwen.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Shwen, for joining us. This is a session with Shwen. My name is Prem Srinivasan. Appreciate it, Stan. And Shwen is a global healthcare transformer. He heads the global digital strategy at BMS and driving strategy and innovation in the ecosystem and all adjacencies. Very active in the industry with publications and digital transformation events, as Stan mentioned. And Shwen, to start off, we want to thank you for this opportunity. And would you like to make some intro remarks and perhaps a few key takeaways from the JP Morgan event?
Yeah, Prem, thank you so much for having me here today. I know it's only for a short while, but I appreciate the time and the opportunity. First of all, I think, like everybody else, this year has been a very different year. Well, the past, I think, 9 months or so has been a very different time for all of us. And even though we're talking about JPM as a meeting here, I think everything bleeds into one these days when everything is virtual and you're essentially going to the same place in your house and looking into a laptop. And even though you're attending a virtual event, whatever news happened the week before, the week after, and even months before, they all kind of bleed into one now. So while I'd like to highlight a few things about JP Morgan and what we got out of it, I think that's one thing to keep in mind, is that all the news kind of flows throughout the year. And JP Morgan was one time when a lot of news came out, but it didn't necessarily mean that these were just isolated to what happened at JPM. I think the other thing is, JPM tends to be the type of meeting where you're very much the news you get and the highlights you hear about are very much limited to the meetings that you have. And JPM's a place where it's meeting rich, right? It's wall to wall, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. usually is full of meetings. And so some of that is strategically planned, and therefore your view of what's new and what's happening and what's cool there is very much based on what you decided to have meetings, who you decided to have meetings with. But part of it is also you're hearing what's happening in general. But in a virtual world, it's just meetings because you're not attending those networking events or the big sideshow events that have multiple people talking about them. So I think that's kind of the lens that I'm working through. But I'll say a lot of what happened and what I'm hearing coming out of there is, very much relevant to the situation we're in now, which is how is COVID really driving digital and changing the way that we're doing things in healthcare. And in particular, I think what I saw a lot of emphasis on was the idea of virtual care and remote patient monitoring, or RPM. How are we starting to really put an emphasis on leveraging those types of platform solutions and tools to enable us to really provide better care at a distance virtually? Telehealth being part of that, but not necessarily the only thing. But I do think, that was a big part of what a lot of these companies that were being featured, that were raising funds, that were getting invested in, were really doing. And then the other one that I found really interesting, there was also a lot more as a result, I think, of part of this, like as we're collecting more data on these virtual platforms, how are we also leveraging real world data and AI to really start to tell a very different story, to be able to start to personalize and customize treatments and care, and really starting to dig into large sets of real world data to really make a difference in healthcare and have meaningful outcomes as a result of that. And I think sorry, Prem.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
The last one thing I was going to mention was, I think what you're still continuing to see even more so, and maybe as a result of just the ability for big tech digital companies, the Amazons, Alphabets of the world,
Mhm.
is their continued an increasing presence in healthcare and how they're starting to leverage what they know in digital to really apply to healthcare. And the launch of Amazon Pharmacy at the end of last year certainly didn't go unnoticed, and I think
Yes.
probably could play a big impact in healthcare going forward. But then it also comes at the heels of experiments that didn't work out, like the Maven, right? The J.P. Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway, and Amazon collaboration came out. The news came out just before J.P. Morgan that they were dissolving that. And so I think there's a balance of activities that's going on there, but definitely big tech is playing a big part and coming into this world very quickly.
Oh, that's fantastic. So delighted to hear your thoughts on how the AI areas are driving some of the innovation and perhaps some key takeaways that you may have had in the JP Morgan session.
Sure. I think, I was talking earlier about how AI, a lot of it's being applied to real world data. And I think, in two ways. I think you're seeing the world of digital therapeutics where, AI is becoming an important part of being able to understand and interpret the real world data to provide feedback and really start to optimize treatments and
Yep.
intervene with, the way that we're disease progression, for example. And so there's that one piece where AI is really important for the actual patients and how they're being treated. On the other hand, you have a lot more on the back end. How are we leveraging data for R&D, for real world data? Sorry, for in silico trials, for commercial optimization, for supply chain and delivery. So it's all across the entire industry, especially if you're thinking about it from a pharma lens. It can be every part of the entire life cycle. So I think the impact is there. I think the majority, a lot of it right now, a lot of the focus is on the R&D space, because I think there's a real need there because of how long it takes for us to bring drugs to market, to be able to optimize that piece, and leveraging data to really start to provide a much more realistic and diverse picture of the type of patients that we're trying to help.
Any highlights on potential trends you think the audience can watch out for in the next 12 to 18 months that you feel?
I think first the continued growth of these virtual care platforms, as well as more hyper localization of care as a whole. And by that I mean things like CVS, for example, is converting a lot of their minute clinics to what they're calling health hubs. And I think they're starting to leverage those not only for chronic care, but also potentially clinical trials could be run at a local level through groups like that, right? So how that's going to be really interesting when we start, because one of our biggest challenges in clinical trials, for example, is we usually have centers, academic centers where people all have to go to, but sometimes that can be hundreds of miles away. And so how do we start to make sure that we start to get to community clinics and local places where people can get care? Maybe it's in between the major visits, but otherwise, I think that's one trend that I'm starting to see. And then also just continued use of data and AI to really empower healthcare as a whole.
Thank you so much, Shwen. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us today. And we appreciate your remarks and look forward to staying in touch with you.
Thank you very much. It was good to see you here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.